The 1971 Queen's Birthday Honours were appointments to orders and decorations of the Commonwealth realms to reward and highlight citizens' good works on the occasion of the official birthday of Queen Elizabeth II. They were announced in supplements to the London Gazette of 4 June 1971. At this time, honours for Australians were awarded both in the United Kingdom honours on the advice of the premiers of Australian states, and also in a separate Australia honours list. Recipients of honours are displayed here as they were styled before the new honours. United Kingdom. Life Peer Baron Major the Right Honourable James Dawson Chichester Clerk, DL, M.P. lately Prime Minister of Northern Ireland. Privy Councillor the Honourable John Douglas Anthony, MP, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Trade and Industry, Commonwealth of Australia. Sir Robert Grant Ferris, MP, Chairman of Ways and Means, House of Commons. Dr. the Honourable Sir C. Woosuguramgulim, M.L.A., Prime Minister, Minister of Defence and Internal Security, and Minister of Information and Broadcasting of Mauritius. Knight Bachelor over Nyquist Arup, C.B.E. for services to civil engineering. Anthony George Bernard Burney, O.B.E. Senior Partner, Binder, Hamlin and Company, Chartered Accountants. John Allen Clark, Chairman and Chief Executive, Plessy Company Limited, for services to export. Charles Claw, for charitable services. Peter Averell Danielle, T.D., Senior Partner, Mullins and Company and Government Broker. John Henry Harris Davis, Chairman and Chief Executive, The Rank Organisation Limited. William Richard Chabot Dole, O.B.E., Regius Professor of Medicine, University of Oxford. Norman William Gray, C.B., Secretary, Scottish Education Department. Fred Harvey Harty, for services to education. Harry Ernest Jones, C.B.E., Agent of the Government of Northern Ireland in Great Britain. William M. Ross Jones, Director General, Agricultural Development and Advisory Service, Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Food. John Towers E. Lidbury, Deputy Managing Director, Hawker Siddeley Group Limited, for services to export. Michael James Lighthill, Luasian Professor of Mathematics, University of Cambridge. Charles Patrick Home McCall, M.B.E. T.D., D.L., Clerk to the Lancashire County Council. George Gray McFarlane, C.B., Controller of Research, Ministry of Defence. James Wilson Mackay, Lord Provost of Edinburgh. Godfrey William Rowland Morley, O.B.E. T.D., President, The Law Society. Thomas Alexander Fraser Noble, M.B.E., Vice-Chancellor, University of Leicester. Basil Arthur Parkes, O.B.E., for services to the fishing industry. Arthur Desmond Hearn Plummer, T.D., D.L., Leader of the Greater London Council. Edward Evan Evans Pritchard, lately Professor of Social Anthropology, University of Oxford. Terence Mervyn Ratigan, C.B.E., Playwright. Samuel Conrad Seward, O.B.E., Director, Stone Platte Industries Limited, for services to export. Henry Martin Smith, C.B.E., H.M. Chief Inspector of Fire Services, Home Office. Percy Stevenson, for political and public services in Lancashire. Terence George Ward, C.B.E., for services to dental surgery. Richard James Webster, D.S.O., for political services. Colonel the Honourable John Douglas Clegg, C.B.E., M.C.Q., P.M.T.D., for public services in Hong Kong. James L. George, O.B.E., for public services in the British Virgin Islands. The Honourable Mr. Justice Louis George Suuve, Chief Justice, Seychelles. Australian State of New South Wales John Waroka Austin, for services to industry. Lincoln Carruthers Hines, O.B.E., for services to the community. John Robert Walton, for services to commerce. State of Victoria Willis Henry Connolly, C.B.E. of St. Kilda, for long and distinguished service with the State Electricity Commission of Victoria. Philip Frederick Jones, of Toorak, for services to journalism. State of Queensland Leslie Charles Thies, C.B.E. of Brisbane, for services to the coal export industry and for his philanthropic activities. Order of the Bath, Knight Grand Cross of the Order of the Bath Sir Edmund Gerald Compton, K.C.B.K.B.E., lately Parliamentary Commissioner for Administration. Knight Commander of the Order of the Bath Vice Admiral Anthony Templar Frederick Griffin, C.B. Vice Admiral Robert George Raper, C.B. Lieutenant General Harry Crawford Tuser, B.E.M.C. late Royal Regiment of Artillery. Air Marshal Harry Burton C.B. C.B.E.D. S.O. Royal Air Force. Kenneth Ernest Beryl, Chairman, University Grants Committee. Robert Braithwaite Marshall, C.B.M.B.E. Second Permanent Secretary, Department of Trade and Industry. Companion of the Order of the Bath, Military Division Rear Admiral Edward Findlay Gareet, O.B.E.D. SC Rear Admiral James Percy Knowles Harkness. Surgeon Rear Admiral Nicholas Sinclair Hepburn, C.B.E.Q. HP Rear Admiral Frederick Charles William Lawson, D.Sc Rear Admiral Richard Douglas Roberts. Rear Admiral Arthur Rodney Barry Sturdy, D.Sc Major General Richard Lewis Clutterbuck, O.B.E. late Corps of Royal Engineers. Major General Jack Raymond Reynolds, O.B.E. R.D. late Royal Army Service Corps, now R.A.R.O. Major General Jeremy Michael Spencer Smith, O.B.E.M.C. late Foot Guards. Major General Walter Babington Thomas, D.S.O.M.C.E.D. late Infantry. Air Vice Marshal Frank Ronald Byrd, D.S.O.D. F.C.A. F.C. Royal Air Force. Air Vice Marshal Peter Charles Cleaver, O.B.E. Royal Air Force. Air Vice Marshal Desmond Ernest Hawkins, C.B.E.D. F.C. Royal Air Force. Air Vice Marshal Douglas Charles Lowe, D.F.C.A. F.C. Royal Air Force. Air Commodore Philippa Francis Marshall, O.B.E.A. D.C. Women's Royal Air Force. Civil Division Paul Adams, T.D. Chief Master, Taxing Office, Supreme Court of Judicature. Sydney Charles Bacon, Controller, Royal Ordnance Factories, Ministry of Defence. Ian Powell Bancroft, Deputy Secretary, Department of the Environment. Jack Eglinton Beddoe, Under-Secretary, Department of the Environment. Edward Percy Brown, Chief Inspector and Commissioner, Board of Customs and Excise. Richard Henry Watson Bullock, Deputy Secretary, Department of Trade and Industry. Neil Francis Cairncross, Deputy Secretary, Cabinet Office. William Robert Cox, Deputy Under-Secretary of State, Home Office. Andrew Francis Joseph Grant, lately Director of Home Regional Services, Department of the Environment. Edwin William George Haynes, Under-Secretary, Department of Trade and Industry. Patrick Dalmahoynan, M.C., Deputy Under-Secretary of State, Ministry of Defence. William John Conway Plum, lately H.M., Chief Inspector of Factories, Department of Employment. Henry Peter Rowe, Parliamentary Counsel. David Somerville, Under-Secretary, Department of Health and Social Security. Joanna Miriam, Miss Spencer, C.B.E. Under-Secretary, Department of Trade and Industry. Douglas William Gretton West, Deputy Secretary, H.M. Treasury. Order of St. Michael and St. George Knight Grand Cross of the Order of St. Michael and St. George Sir Archibald Duncan Wilson, K.C.M.G. H.M. Ambassador, Moscow. Sir Dennis Arthur Hepworth Wright, K.C.M.G. H.M. Ambassador, Tehran. Knight Commander of the Order of St. Michael and St. George. Geoffrey George Arthur, C.M.G. H.M. Political Resident, Bahrain. Reginald Michael Haddo, C.M.G. H.M. Ambassador, Buenos Aires. John Edward Killick, C.M.G. Foreign and Commonwealth Office. Crawford Murray MacLehose, C.M.G. M.B.E. Governor-designate, Hong Kong. John Hudpeck, C.M.G. H.M. Ambassador, Dublin. Companion of the Order of St. Michael and St. George. Christopher Mervyn Daly, Chairman, Iraq Petroleum Company Limited. George Jeffrey David Hill, Assistant Secretary, Department of the Environment. Professor William Edgar Kershaw, V.R.D. for Services to Parasitology. Harry Norman Rothey, Assistant Secretary, Department of Health and Social Security. David Pascoe Ayres, Foreign and Commonwealth Office. William Stanley Bates, British High Commissioner, Georgetown. Roy Gristle Bennett, for Services to British Interests in Singapore. Edwin Bolland, Counsel at HM Embassy, Washington. Michael Dennis Arthur Clinton, A.M., Deputy Colonial Secretary, Hong Kong. Kenneth Arthur East, Minister, British High Commission, Lagos. Anthony Arthur Golds, M.VOHM Ambassador and Consul General, Yaoundé. Keith Lyndall Gordon, lately Justice of Appeal, West Indies Associated States Supreme Court. David Gerard Gordon Smith, Foreign and Commonwealth Office. Jeffrey Ernest Derrick McBride, M.B.E. Foreign and Commonwealth Office. Frank Mills, Foreign and Commonwealth Office. Terence John O'Brien, M.C.H.M. Ambassador, Kathmandu. Reginald McCartney Samples, D.S.O.O.B.E. Head of British Government Office and Senior Trade Commissioner, Toronto. Anthony James Williams, H.M. Ambassador and Consul General, Phnom Penh. Australian State of New South Wales. Edwin James Walder, for Services to the State. State of Victoria Councillor Edward Wallace Best, for Services to local government and the community, especially as Lord Mayor of the City of Melbourne. State of Queensland Alderman William Robert Golding, M.B.E. of Gladstone, for outstanding public service. State of South Australia Maxwell Lewis Dennis, of Glenelg East, for outstanding public service. Royal Victorian Order. Dame Commander of the Royal Victorian Order the Honourable Olivia Vernon, Mrs. Mulholland, C.V.O. Knight Commander of the Royal Victorian Order the Right Honourable Gilbert James, Earl of Ancaster, T.D. Major General the Honourable Michael Fitzalan Howard, C.B.C.B.E.M. V.O.M. C. John Francis Hewitt, C.B.E. Commander of the Royal Victorian Order Reginald Wilfred Barrow, M.V.O. Robert Edward Boot. Brigadier William Greenwood Carr, D.S.O. Lieutenant Colonel Harold Andrew Balved Lawson, M.V.O. Commander Philip Brian Martineau, O.B.E. Royal Navy. Edward Max Nicholson, C.B. Marshal Arnott Sisson, C.B.E. Cecil Dennis Waldron, O.B.E. Member of the Royal Victorian Order. At this time the two lowest classes of the Royal Victorian Order were Member and Member, both with post-nominals. MVO Member was renamed Lieutenant from the 1985 New Year Honours onwards. 4th Class James Bell, the Reverend Ronald Budge, Miss Ethel Strachan Cahoon, M.V.O. M.B.E. Commander John Philip Edwards, Royal Navy. Squadron Leader Thomas Alvin Jackson, A.F.C. Royal Air Force. John William Lewis, M.V.O. Malcolm Henry McQueen. Adrian Vincent Pelly, M.V.O. Leslie Potts. Harold Vince Tillotson. 5th Class Walter Arthur Carpenter. George Crisp. Anne Mary, Mrs. Hughes. Miss Joan Margaret Kirby. Miss Diana Mary Robina McGill. Royal Victorian Medal Henry Charles Owen Clark. Police Constable Edward William Fry. Metropolitan Police George Gordon. William Holloway. Police Constable Evan John Jones. Metropolitan Police Chief Petty Officer John Rowland Mays. Bernard Wallace McLaren. Arthur Stanley Shergold. Reginald Southgate. William Henry Spong. William George Tinson. Order of the British Empire. Knight Grand Cross of the Order of the British Empire Lieutenant General Sir Ian Henry Freeland, K.C.B.D. S.O. Late Infantry, Deputy Colonel the Royal Anglian Regiment. Sir Peter Maldenstud, Lord Mayor of London. Dame Commander of the Order of the British Empire Kathleen Mary, Mrs. Olorenshaw. For services to education. Australian States, State of Victoria Mabel Irene, Lady Coles, C.B.E. of Mount Eliza. For charitable activities. Knight Commander of the Order of the British Empire Surgeon Vice Admiral Eric Blackburn Bradbury, CBQ. HP Acting Air Marshal John Samuel Rowlands, GCO. BE Royal Air Force. Sir John Norris Nicholson, BTC, IE, Chairman, Ocean Steamship Company Limited. Ernest John Partridge, President, Confederation of British Industry. The Right Honourable Robert Hugh Turton, MCDL, MP. For political and public services. Rudolph Franz Joseph Byng, C.B.E. for services to Anglo-American relations. Professor Douglas Vernon Hubble, C.B.E. M.D. F. R.C.P., lately Dean of Medical Faculty, Haile Selassie I University, Addis Ababa. Australian States, State of Queensland the Honourable Gordon William Wesley Chalk, M.L.A. of Brisbane. For distinguished services to the state as a Minister of the Crown and Parliamentarian. Order of the Companions of Honour Charles Herbert Best, C.B.E.F. R.S. for services to medical research. Sir Arthur Edward Drummond Bliss, K.C.V.O. for services to music. The Right Honourable John Grey Gorton, M.P. Minister for Defence, lately Prime Minister of the Commonwealth of Australia. New Zealand, Knight Bachelor Walter Neville Norwood, of Wellington. For outstanding services to commerce. Order of St. Michael and St. George, Companion of the Order of St. Michael and St. George Charles Hilgendorf, of Ashburton. For very valuable services to farming, the Most Reverend Norman Alfred Lesser of Napier. For very valuable services as Primate and Archbishop of New Zealand of the Anglican Church. Order of the British Empire Knight Commander of the Order of the British Empire Civil Division Reginald Harry Smythe of Auckland, for outstanding services to the forestry industry. Commander of the Order of the British Empire Civil Division the Reverend Pakaki Heki Toro Leonard MBE of Rotorua, for very valuable services to the community and especially the Maori people. Cyril William Mace of Christchurch, for very valuable services to manufacturing. Victor Worth Thomas of Wellington, for very valuable services as Controller of Customs. Robert Archibald White of Paraparaumu, for very valuable services to sport administration especially horse racing. Military Division Air Commodore Douglas Fitzclarence St. George DFC Royal New Zealand Air Force. Officer of the Order of the British Empire Civil Division Reginald Percy Andrews of Whanganui, for valuable services as Mayor of Whanganui. Eric Tamate Bevan of Christchurch, for valuable services to commerce and tourism. Arthur Trevor Campbell, for valuable services as New Zealand Public Relations Officer in London. Robert James Charles, for services to sport. Geoffrey Noel Townshend Greenbank of Auckland, for valuable services as Headmaster of King's College, Auckland. Matthew Graham Blacklock Harvey of New Plymouth, for valuable services as chairman of the Taranaki Education Board. Geoffrey Henry Leslie of Wellington, for valuable services as director of the Division of Dental Health Department. Terence Henderson McCombs of Christchurch, for valuable services to education. David Headley McElroy of Milton, for valuable services to the community. The Reverend Lawrence Alfred North of Wellington, for valuable services as a minister of religion. Peter John Scott of Dunedin, for valuable services to the community. Mrs. Mavis Ada Tiller of Wellington, for valuable services as national president of the National Council of Women. Robert Burns Watson MBCHB of Queenstown, for valuable services as a medical practitioner. Military Division Captain Frederick Hardman, Royal New Zealand Navy. Lieutenant Colonel Edward Senior, Corps of Royal New Zealand Engineers. Wing Commander Alfred George Edward Bew, Royal New Zealand Air Force. Member of the Order of the British Empire Civil Division Mrs. Ellen Elizabeth Buckingham of Invercargill, for services to the community especially as a member of the Southland Education Board. John William Byers of Kaikoai, for services to the community. Raymond Malcolm Collis of Manawatu, for services to local government. Mrs. Doris May Dennis of Gisborne, for services to the community. Mrs. Elsie Elizabeth Fellingham of Featherstone, for services to the community. James Albert Nichols Halford of Northwood, for services to the community. John Brown Hamilton of Queenstown, for services to local government. Sidney Perra Harling of Blenheim, for services as Mayor of Blenheim. Arthur Reginald Harris of Mount Maunganui, for services as Mayor of Mount Maunganui. John Hobson of Auckland, for services as Superintendent of Mount Eden Prison and especially for his exemplary resolution and skill in successfully terminating a prison riot at the prison on the 20th of March 1971. Graham Lawrenson of New Plymouth, for services to his profession and to the community as an architect. David Collingwood Low MDFRACS of Nelson, for services to the community. Archibald James McCallum of Oamaru, for services to scouting. Robert Inmillan McCulley of Auckland, for services as Mayor of Mount Wellington. Ralph Merrill MacDonald of Mosgiel, for services as Mayor of Mosgiel. Albert Leonard Sutherland of Greymouth, for services to the community. Conway Wilberforce Depitt of Palmerston North, for services to the community. Miss Hini Tete Rafari of Hamilton, for social work among the Maori people of the Waikato. Ernest Edwin Willoughby MD.CHB of Huntly, for services to the community especially as Mayor of Huntly. Military Division Temporary Lieutenant Commander Brian John Mahoney, Royal New Zealand Navy. Warrant Officer 2nd Class Joseph Gormanley, Royal New Zealand Corps of Signals. Major Molly Lois Moore, New Zealand Women's Royal Army Corps. Warrant Officer 2nd Class Leslie George Stanton, Royal New Zealand Infantry Regiment. Squadron Leader John Allen Scrimshaw AFC, Royal New Zealand Air Force. Companion of the Imperial Service Order John Bruce Brown of Wellington, for valuable services as Valuer General. British Empire Medal for Gallantry. Military Division Marine Engineering Artificer 3rd Class Graham Stewart Holmes, Royal New Zealand Navy, for courage and devotion to duty during a fire in the engine room of HMNZS Waikato. Marine Engineering Mechanician 1st Class Stephen Howarth, Royal New Zealand Navy, for courage and devotion to duty during a fire in the engine room of HMNZS Waikato. Civil Division Andrew Robert Michael Bowie of Handmer, for services as a mountain guide. Herbert Wedgwood Brabant of Whakatane, for services to those at sea by the operation of a shore wireless station. Mrs. Joyce Brabant of Whakatane, for services to those at sea by the operation of a shore wireless station. Miss Mary Constance Burrell of Hastings, for services to the aged. Sydney Keith Christensen of Taupo, for services to the community. Henry Willoughby Hampton of Chatham Islands, for services to the community as a police constable. Albert Cyril Loach of Christchurch, for services to the community. Hector George McAllister of Kaiapoi, for services to the community as a chief fire officer. Mrs. Grace McNaught of Te Kuiti, for services to the community. Miss Elizabeth Matheson of Wellington, for services as a potter. Miss Amy Marion Ryan of Auckland, for services to nursing. Mrs. Patricia Ellen Pamela Simcox of Hawke's Bay, for services to the community. Gordon Day Stavely of Wellington, for services as a prison officer. Athol Gladwin Wood of Papakura, for services to farming. Military Division Chief Electrician Edward Dawson, Royal New Zealand Navy. Sergeant Frederick Donald Barclay, Royal New Zealand Infantry Regiment. Flight Sergeant David Carl, Royal New Zealand Air Force. Sergeant Alexander Allen McEwen, Royal New Zealand Air Force. Royal Red Cross, Associate of the Royal Red Cross Matron Marjorie Edith Trail, Royal New Zealand Nursing Corps. Air Force Cross Squadron Leader Gerard Clive Brown, Royal New Zealand Air Force. Queen's Police Medal Robert Alexander Moore, Chief Superintendent, New Zealand Police Force. Queen's Commendation for Brave Conduct Engineering Mechanic First Class Rig Rivas Ormsby, Royal New Zealand Navy, for courage shown during a fire in the engine room of HMNZS Waikato. Leading Engineering Mechanic Bernard Charles Shearsby, Royal New Zealand Navy, for courage shown during a fire in the engine room of HMNZS Waikato.